I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast. And today we're going to talk about Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson. What parts of Russell Wilson's game give people confidence that he's going to be better than Kenny Pickett and help the Steelers do better than they did with Kenny Pickett? All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter here with Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making it your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. As playoffs have winded down in some sports, the sports are still sporting. So while it's sporting all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. It's daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said before, I'm joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. Alan's trying to enjoy the few months of peace that we get here.
I'm finishing this. I gotta update my Facebook status. I don't know if you can see this.
Mark saved from talking about Brandon Ayuk today. That's a great Facebook status.
Just gotta get my Facebook status there done. Good.
So he just puts up Mark safe from talking to Brandon Ayuk today. Listen, we don't have to. There's no TikToks. There's no tweets. There's no more pivot podcast that he has to do. You know, if he wants to come on this podcast, Brandon Ayuk, you're more than welcome. But we are happy to talk about things other than Brandon Ayuk. And with that, Alan Saunders, I want to talk to you about Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson. Now, we could talk about the Kenny Pickett drama. His quarterback's coach, kind of went out and said that the stories that have been spread about him are BS, and there's this back in the third week. We don't need to carve through that mess. But let's focus on what we know about how Kenny Pickett played for the Steelers, how Russell Wilson has played for both the Seahawks and the Broncos, and how we think that it will translate to the Steelers this upcoming year. Because I think that's the really big thing here, Alan, is that when people talk about why they think the Steelers will be better, if they argue that, some people don't argue that, but when people talk about, a lot of people point to, well, the quarterback position is just naturally going to be better. If you're looking at Russell Wilson, what parts of his game can be demonstrably better than Kenny Pickett's game that actually does help the offense be more successful?
I think it's just the direction of the offense. I'm not even sure it's Russell Wilson's game. I think it's having a veteran quarterback that can do things like get up to the line and understand that the play call we're in is not the right one, or not. Maybe it's not the wrong one, but it's not the best one. That we have an audible that I could get to that would be better than what we had installed. About being able to lead and direct an offense that has a lot of young players on it. I mean, even guys that we're talking about as like leaders of this offense, guys like Pat Freiermuth, still in their rookie deals, like Najee Harris, like these are some of the older players on this offense are still on rookie contracts. It's a young group. I think having a leader that can keep them together, keep everyone pulling in the same direction, and just get everybody on the same page with the install of a new offense, especially, I think that's where we're really going to see Russell Wilson shine, is in the mental game. And I really think that's honestly one of the big things that we didn't see any growth and development from in Kenny Pickett. Like, it's not that he was necessarily like horrendously deficient, but it didn't improve that much over his year and a half as the team's starting quarterback. And I think you could point to a lot. I don't think Matt Canada, we talked about this on this podcast a lot. I'm not sure Matt Canada was the right person to be teaching him that position, considering that he didn't have a ton of success doing it in the past with anyone. But I really think that is where you're going to see the difference in Russell Wilson show up, is the above the neck ability at the quarterback position, and how that can be an improvement for the entire offense, and not just how the ball gets delivered on passing downs.
That's where I think that I'm with you on the timing part of the running the offense part. And to me, that was the part that I was waiting to see if when Kenny Pickett would get that down, because I felt like when Kenny Pickett learned how to just get that, just to be in sync in an offense that flowed well or just flowed at all, I thought that that's where he could come in and be solid for the Steelers and be the kind of quarterback that we've been saying that they've needed for the last few years. Alan, you and I have been very loud about this. They don't need Peyton Manning or Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes. All those things would be nice. They need a guy who's going to run the offense, get the ball out on time, be accurate, be able to throw the ball in the right spots, and give this offense chances to make plays in space, to take advantage of mismatches, and to hand the football off, and do so just enough so that they can hand the football off and use this offensive line that they're investing a lot into, and this running back room that might be the best 1-2 punch in the NFL right now. And one thing that I think is also interesting about this too is when looking at there's all the different analytics out there, but Warren Sharp posted this over the weekend, just a list of the highest rate of incomplete passes due to inaccuracy. And at the very top, funny enough, was Deshaun Watson at 43.9. But about, I'd say, maybe 10 spots down or so, so the 10th most was Kenny Pickett at 35%. And this was something that I talked about, and you and I talked about all season long last year, was things, there were plenty of times, like, yes, there was discoordination where the offense wasn't on the same page, and it, could have been organized better, and there were things that needed to be better there. But there were just also straight up, flat out misses. And several. And that's where I think Kenny Pickett needed to be better in those spots. And on the flip side of that, the fifth best among the starters, or excuse me, the sixth best among the starters is Russell Wilson with only 25.3% of his throws. That's less than 1% behind Patrick Mahomes. And it's more than 1% ahead of Justin Herbert. So I feel like that's good company to keep. Granted, that's not what makes touchdowns happen all the time. It's not what leads offenses to great success. But I think it's a sign of where I think that where you're getting at and where I'm getting at, Russell Wilson can be better about being in sync with an offense and giving them catchable balls for the team to make the plays, and him to again just be more of the game manager.
Yeah, I think the accuracy issues with Kenny Pickett were weird last year. They were hard to diagnose. It's not something I saw from him before. And so I didn't really understand it. I think Russell Wilson should be more accurate than Kenny Pickett was last year. Another thing I think he's going to be good at is increasing the number of splash plays without significantly increasing the risk. I think he has such a good deep ball, and I think he's so savvy about when to use it. Over his career, he has had, now listen, last year it wasn't really that. So that's the caveat. But last year was the first year where his intended air yards per pass attempt were below 8.6. Every other season in his career was above 8.6. Kenny, the first 2 years, were 7.5 and 7.0. Now, last year, Russ was only 7.1. So you have to say, okay, why did it change last year in Denver, and will it be the same? But I think there's certainly a potential. I mean, I saw him throw some deep balls in OTAs where I was like, ooh, that looks pretty nice. And so I think there's a potential for him to complete on some more deeper passes. And honestly, I don't think it was a physical thing with Kenny Pickett. It felt like an aggressiveness thing, like a fear of turning the ball over more than it was his ability or inability to throw the ball down the field. But I think that is what Russ has been known for. And I think the fit of Russ with the Arthur Smith offense in that area, not in every area, but in that area, is really perfectly aligned, where Arthur Smith wants to run, suck you in, take a deep shot. And Russ is perfectly content to hand the ball off 50, 60% of the time. And then the thing he probably does best is move around the pocket a little bit, buy some time, and then unleash the moonshot. So I think that's an area where I think this offense can be a lot better than it has been in the past. There are probably some areas where I don't think it will be better. Like, Russ is not an over-the-middle rhythm passer. Now, Kenny Pickett didn't do that very well either, but, I'm not expecting big leaps in that area. I think that's something that Russ has always struggled with and probably will continue to.
Absolutely. I want to talk about how and whether this offense can be upgraded enough to face some of the really tough opponents on the Steelers' schedule this year. We'll talk about that more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Do you ever get caught up comparing yourself to other people in the lives that you see them live online, or you think you see them live online? Do you ever feel caught up in social media and think someone else's life looks so perfect compared to yours? But chances are they're probably not. And the best way to live your life is to focus on things that you want. But how do you block out all that outside noise and just focus on yourself? Well, that's where good therapy can come in and be a tool to help you get there. Sometimes it just takes a professional to help you refocus on what matters most. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders. He's back on the show, doing another show with us. Alan, so let's talk about this, about the offense and how it can help them in some of the specific battles we see the Steelers going through in this upcoming season. Because, again, the Steelers, naturally, when you're in the AFC North, you're already going to have one of the hardest schedules, but they're also playing the NFC East. The Steelers are also, kind of put in a position where their schedule is going to be one of the hardest schedules in the NFL, if not the hardest, this upcoming season. And we also know that the gauntlet starts, in week 11 when they play the Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals. I mean, that is a row of all teams that people are talking about right now as playoff contenders to do some damage this year. So the question is, though, can this offense be upgraded to the point where they can go into some of these games and expect real offensive output that can be the factor that actually wins the games, not just be good enough to survive like they have been? Because that's how they've beaten, like when they beat the Bills. They didn't beat the Bills because Ben Roethlisberger was fantastic. They beat the Bills because T.J. Watt dismantled that entire offense, and they did just enough to get over them. I think they needed a Miles Killebrew blocked punt or something as well in that game. But can this offense win games on its own merit? I mean, the defense still has to be good. What do you think about that?
I think it's good enough to give the defense an occasional off day and some grace, right? Like, it felt like the last 2.5 years, 3 years, really. Like, if the defense had a bad day, it was over.
Yeah.
Like there weren't too many games where you saw the team pulling out a win when the defense was just so-so. I think, especially against some non-premium opponents, I think this offense has the potential to be good enough. I think also the fact that they're going to run the ball more and I believe more successfully should lead to the defense being exposed a little bit less. Like, they've been on the field an incredible amount. And so I think dominating the time of possession makes the defense better, even if the defense isn't better, right? Like, the defense could actually be worse and play better if they're on the field less. And so I think they have a chance to play some better supporting football. Do I think they're going to go out there and beat teams like 48-35? Not on a regular basis. No. I'm not seeing that. I do think they can play. I think that's it. Play better complementary football from the offensive standpoint. And now, like, how much better does that make them? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. And the schedule is, as you mentioned, very difficult. And so I think that's I do think there's a place where we get to if we're looking at this team and the reasonable outcomes where it's like, well, they could be actually a lot better, but the record would not reflect that.
Right.
And here's what I've been saying a lot about this season too, is like, I'm not as focused on the record because of how difficult the schedule is as I am if the Steelers go to Buffalo in the wild card game again, do they have a better chance of winning it this time? Because I really feel like that's the target of so many of their moves this offseason anyway, that, like, I do feel like this offense does that. I don't know that they're going to win a lot more games, but I do feel like they've put themselves in position to be in a better shape to win a road playoff game against a tough team.
I think that's a great point too, is that if they don't get more wins in the regular season, that it's fine as long as they get to the playoffs and then they actually win in the playoffs. And I think that would be the sign of progress that a lot of people are talking about here. And I feel you on that because, again, the reason I'm pointing is because the defense has won so many games, and they've won games against good teams. Like, they have shut down the Bengals with Joe Burrow and healthy. They've shut down Lamar Jackson when he's good and healthy. They've shut down Josh Allen when he's good and healthy. But asking them to do it game in and game out is a lot. And in past years, you get breaks when you play bad teams, and sometimes they still lost to those bad teams, or mediocre teams. And that's where I think the Steelers, the question is, about the offense, can they buy them those times, especially against those teams that aren't that good? Like, you think back to when they lost to Zach Wilson and the Jets that year. And granted, that was a wild game because that was the game that Kenny Pickett came in after halftime, and there was a lot of factors there. But, like, if the offense just has a mild day there, not a bad one, and not the bad one that they had, they win that game, hey, they're in the playoffs. And that's where I wonder what games like that can work out for the Steelers' favor.
Miami game that year, too. Very similar.
Right. Exactly. All they needed was just 20 points. Just give them that, and the defense, and keep the defense off the field more often. Again, I remind people, if you go back to when Broderick Jones became a consistent starter in week 10, the day before that, they ranked 30th in the NFL when it came to time of possession. They averaged 27 minutes of possessing the football. So 30th, that's third worst in the NFL. If you go to the end of the season, they jumped up to 20th. So in just 10 in half the season, they were able to jump up 10 spots because they improved there. Now you're talking about a better, a more invested in offensive line, a quarterback that knows how to be in time, an offensive coordinator that's going to be able to put things more in sync than the last one was able to. And I think, and also in general, a more mature offense that's going to have, and yeah, you're still going to have young guys like Zach Frazier and Troy Fautanu trying to fit their way into it. But Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, Jalen Warren, James Daniels, Isaac Seumalo, Broderick Jones being a second-year player, George Pickens being more involved, Calvin Austin having a full year under his belt now after missing his rookie season. All those things, and even Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, all those things lend itself to me to think this can be a smarter offense. This doesn't have, and you're right, it doesn't have to be an offense that puts up 45 points every week, and it's not going to be. But if this is an offense that buys the defense time to rest, that holds on to some and can just be a decent offense that possesses the football, gets your points when you can, and again averages somewhere in the middle of the league in points per game, which is usually around like 22 points per game on average, I think that's the thing that can help them deal with this tough schedule and get through some of those games where the defense played well. They just didn't play elite. And that was the problem, was there were games where if the Steelers defense didn't play elite, they didn't stand a chance.
And the other part of that equation that I really like is if you're going to build an offense that maybe like pretty good at some things, but not good at everything, and you're talking about what works in the playoffs, I think running the ball and not turning it over feels to me like, okay, if you're not going to have elite quarterback play, if you're not going to have Mahomes, or Josh Allen or someone like that, if you're not going to get that, that's obviously the number one way to win in January. Okay, but if you don't have that, I think running the ball, keeping the game low scoring, and not turning the ball over is the next best way. It's the Detroit Lions, it's the Baltimore Ravens, and guess where those teams were last postseason? Like, it's the Philadelphia Eagles in a lot of ways as well. Like, those are teams that have had success recently. Yeah, they're not the ones that are holding the Lombardi Trophy, but I think that's a pretty good game plan to get you as far as you can go without that superstar quarterback.
Right here, you're right there. I want to talk about where this can now lead to more wins in the Steelers schedule. We're going to go through the week by week, compare it, and see, is there a way, what is the most likely way for the Steelers to try to increase their wins from 2022 or 2023 in 2024? That and more here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. And sure, the NBA and the NHL are done, but we get fewer games there, but there's still so much sports action going on. You go on FanDuel, and you can see all the different ways to bet on that sports action, and that includes Major League Baseball, the WNBA, soccer has all the great stuff going on right now, and there's so many big fights that are happening. And again, FanDuel lets you get in on all that action all summer long. And all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. A new one's coming out. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Doesn't matter if you're a new customer or a returning customer. FanDuel's got you with daily updates. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Alan Saunders. Alan, I want to talk to you because we've talked about the Steelers schedule, and I know that you've talked about it with Steelers fans as well. The idea is that, hey, if this team is better, which on paper, I think we can agree that there's a lot more potential in this team with the moves made at quarterback, adding Patrick Queen at linebacker, maybe with the cornerback situation. And as long as guys are healthy, like there's potential for this Steelers roster to be better than last year's roster. But for the Steelers to get a better record, that means they still have to beat the teams in front of them. And the question is, with this being one of the harder schedules in the NFL, where do those wins come from? So I want to go through and see games. I want to categorize the different types of games to see, because you can never say who's definitely going to win a game. Especially, it's even a day before sometimes, but even what are we 2 months out from the start of the season? So we're not going to try to predict exactly what happens in these games, but games that you feel like matchup wise, from what we understand of both teams, these are games the Steelers could be at least favored in, feel comfortable about, and then we'll get into the games where we feel less so about that and see which of those games are the ones that can get them over the top of getting more than a better than a 10-7 record. You ready for help me here?
Let's do it.
All right. I think we can say both the Falcons and the Broncos, the first 2 games of the season, those are games the Steelers need to handle their business in, come out strong, not be sputtering out the gate, and play well in. And those should be games that they should be favored in. Would you agree?
I don't know if I agree about the Falcons. Like, that's going to be a tough game. I think, that's a team that's had a very underrated defense last year. I think they're going to be a challenge because they're going to be very new. And so, that's not a team you want to play on the first week. When I talked to Landon Roberts about this in the spring, he said the first thing I saw on the schedule, who do we have week 1? He's like, oh, it's a team with a new coach. I don't know what they're going to do. We're going to line up all week and just kind of hope and guess. And so I don't know. I think that one's a little bit more difficult. I certainly think that the Steelers can win it. I'm not sure they're going to be favored. I do think they'll be favored at Denver. If there's an NFL team that looks like they ought to be tanking this year, it's the Denver Broncos. I'm not even sure what they're doing with Cortland Sutton. I think they should trade him, but that's a team that's going absolutely nowhere. And I definitely agree that the Steelers should be pretty easy favorites in that one.
So we'll leave the Broncos as favorites. We'll come back to the Falcons later. You got the Chargers and the Colts. Chargers also with a new coach and still Justin Herbert. That's your first home game, and then the Colts on the road. The Steelers lost the Colts badly on the road last year, and they didn't even have Anthony Richardson. Presumably, he would be healthy for this game. Those 2 games I consider in the toss-up category. Especially for now, because I think the Chargers have talent on their team. They just needed to put it together, and now they've got Jim Harbaugh trying to put it together.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably I like the Steelers' chances at home against the Chargers a lot better than in Indy. But yeah, I mean, I think those are both games that should feel pretty even at this point.
At the Raiders, I feel like that's a game that the Steelers should be more comfortable in. So I was going to put that along with the Broncos there. I think that the Jets, the Giants, and the Commanders, those 4 games right there, the Steelers, I feel like, need to go on a run and at least pull 3 out of those 4 and not slip up against them.
I mean, I think the Jets are very much up in the air. They still had a really good defense last year. I mean,
and Aaron Rodgers
I am
presumably
not particularly optimistic about the chances of Aaron Rodgers finding the fountain of youth and coming out here and looking like the player he was before.
I'm not feeling it.
But I guess we shouldn't discount it either, right? Like it's possible. I agree on the Giants and the Raiders, though. I think those are games. Then the Commanders, absolutely, that the Steelers should feel like they should be able to win.
So after that is when the gauntlet starts, and we'll just leave all of those in the toss-up category automatically. So you and I both agreed on Commanders.
Some of those are less than toss-ups.
Yeah, some of those are a lot less than toss-ups. Yeah, some of those are toss-backs. But so you and I agreed on Commanders, Giants, Raiders, Chargers. Also, I passed right up the Cowboys because that's not going to be an easy game. So yeah, Commanders, Giants, Raiders, Chargers, Broncos. So right there, those are the 5 games that we think the Steelers should feel more confident about. So that's 5 games that we're saying that they should be able to pull out. So now you got to find 6 more games out of the other 12. So that they can pull out there to get to that 11-game mark. And I think that's where the question is, where do they find those wins in this schedule? Now, here's the other thing about this. They could find a lot of those wins in the AFC North because they've played the AFC North very well for the past few years, especially Baltimore. But it's also about, trying to set yourself up so you don't have to do that in the second half of the season because you're not going to get much of a break.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's really going to be about this offense. It really ties into the conversation we had earlier, right? The best defenses in the NFL by EPA per play last year, Cleveland twice, Baltimore twice, the Jets, the Cowboys. They don't play the Saints, but they get the Chiefs, the Raiders, there's Pittsburgh, and then Atlanta. So they have more than 10 games against top 10 defenses from last season.
Yep.
It is going to be incumbent on the offense to just look, they're not going to have to win these games on their own, but they're going to have to find. And the good news for the Steelers is, look, Cowboys early is going to be challenging, no question. Okay, but they don't play any. They have the first 3 games, and then they've got Cowboys, Raiders, Jets. That's 3 good defenses in a row. Like, I think we need to see some life from the offense by then.
Yeah.
They can afford to stumble out of the gate. And then I think we probably are going to say, like, the Cowboys is a game that they're not going to be favored to win. Right. But those next 2, I think they should be. But if this offense does not come together quickly enough, those are teams with good defenses. Aaron Rodgers could be a talented quarterback. Like, if they are only, 2-5 or 3-4 come into that bye week, I am not feeling good about the rest. About the I'm sorry, it's 8 weeks, but even at 500, I'm not feeling great about the way the rest of the season is going to go. Like, they got to win some games early, and they're not going to do it if the offense doesn't get going quickly.
And that's where it comes back to the topic that I started with about the offense, about needing to be better, needing Russell Wilson to be better, needed this offense to just, again, possess the football, do those things right. I feel like part of this thing here is in those first, 9 games there, where you're talking about, Falcons, Broncos, Chargers, Colts, Cowboys, Raiders, Jets, Giants, Commanders. That's 9 games you got there. I think they got to win at least six of those games, maybe even 7, to be in this category and to feel comfortable heading into the rest of the season there. Because if you win 7 games, you only need to win 4 of your last 8. So you only need to go 500 down that stretch there, and that puts you in that position here. But again, 7-2. Going into week 11 is no just, they can just do that kind of feat.
It's not a coast.
Exactly. It's like, they can just go 7-2. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. There is going to be an early emphasis. And the Steelers, the past few years, several years, really, they have not been a team that comes out the gate blazing. And there's been times they've won the season opener, but then have not followed it up with a strong performance. So that's why I think a big part of this comes back to, what can Russell Wilson do that Kenny Pickett doesn't? What can the What can the offense do that can help them gut out some of those games where the offense couldn't gut things out last year? All those things are going to play into where they find those more of those wins in 2024.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big reasons. I mean, we talked a lot about Wilson versus what Kenny did last year, but when you're looking at Wilson versus Fields, I think like the idea that they have to hit the ground fast and start stacking wins early, to me, is a reason to go with the more experienced guy. I don't think Russell Wilson actually has a lot going in his favor beyond that in that competition. Because, big picture, like if you're looking at this year and beyond, it's way better for the Steelers if Justin Fields figures it out. And then you have your quarterback situation done instead of just, we have Russell Wilson for now and we'll see how long that lasts. But if you're talking about winning this year and trying to get the playoffs this year, you have to start fast if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, because that's where they can make hay. And so I think that's one of the big reasons that Russell Wilson has been given that pole position by Mike Tomlin in this battle, because they understands how important weeks 1, 2, and 3 are to his team's potential playoff success.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know what else you guys got cooking at SteelersNow.com.
Yeah, you can find me at @Saunders_PGH on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at PGH Steelers Now, sites account SteelersNow.com. And you can find my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive, on YouTube or wherever you find podcasts. And I'm working on a long thing about going back over Kevin Colbert's last draft classes. And maybe I feel like I've learned some things I didn't really understand when I started this project. Not quite sure I have the conclusions I thought I was going to have, but it's been an interesting ride. So go over there and check that out and come along on this journey with me.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders. Thanks so much for joining us, Alan. As always, a pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Again, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. And find me here every day, Monday through Friday, on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Talk about your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll be back tomorrow with our Wednesday episode here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.